Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah for attending tonight's program with City of Knowledge. Inshallah will be the first of the next couple of nights, so we'll have Majlis programs for the nights of Arbaeen and inshallah our Arbaeen program. We are blessed to have multiple different reciters and speakers. Inshallah, Shaykh Mehdi Muhammadpur is going to be reciting the Majlises for the Arbaeen programs at City of Knowledge, and we'll also have Brother Asif Ali and other guests, inshallah, that will be presenting the poetry. With that, please help me begin the program with a loud salawat.
تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابدون ما أعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيम. अस्सलामु अलैकुम या अली मदद। मोमिनीन, सबसे पहले तो मैं अपनी जानिब से सिटी ऑफ नॉलेज का बहुत बहुत ममनून हूँ, मुतशक्किर हूँ, शुक्रगुज़ार हूँ, जिन्होंने एक मरतबा फिर मुझे मौला के इस ज़िक्र में शामिल किया, दाखिल सवाब किया। मौला इनकी तौफ़ीक़ात में इजाफ़ा करे। मोमिनीन, जैसा कि आप लोग जानते हैं, सैयद शुहदा इमाम मज़लूम करबला इमाम हुसैन अलैहिस्सलाम का चेलम है, अरबईन है, और इस अरबईन के हवाले से ये प्रोग्राम का इनक़ाद किया गया है। जैसा कि मुझे हुक्म था सोज़ का, तो मैं सोज़ सलाम आपकी खिदमत में पेश करूँगा और मेरे बाद क़िबला मजलिस से ख़िताब फरमाएंगे, और उनके बाद हमारे साथ पाकिस्तान से हमें ज्वाइन करेंगे, कराची से अंजुमन शबाबुल मोमिनीन। हम लोग बहुत बहुत शुक्रगुज़ार हैं सिटी ऑफ नॉलेज की जानिब से अंजुमन शबाबुल मोमिनीन का, कि जिन्होंने इस मसरूफ़ियत के बावजूद भी हमारी बात रखते हुए इस पुरसे में हमारे साथ शामिल हुए। मौला इनकी तौफ़ीक़ात में इजाफ़ा करे। बर मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सलावत। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद व अज्जल फ़रजहुम। मुअज़्ज़िज़ सामीन, एक सोज़ आप लोगों की समातों की नज़र करता हूँ, और बख़ुशनुदी इमाम ज़माना बुलंद तरीन सलावत। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद व अज्जल फ़रजहुम। अब्बास की बहन पे कैसी घड़ी ये आई, बालों में खाक डाले रोती है बिरदाई। अब्बास की बहन पे कैसी घड़ी ये आई, बालों में खाक डाले रोती है बेरदाई। ये बैन कर रही है तारीख़ करबला की, घुट घुट के रो रही थी मज़लूम शाहज़ादी। जिस वक्त ज़ालिमों ने हाथों में रसन बांधी, उस वक्त बहुत उसको गाजी की याद आई। अब्बास की बहन पे कैसी घड़ी ये आई, बालों में खाक डाले, रोती है बेरिदाई। और ये शेर देखिएगा, घर बिनते मुस्तफा का बर्बाद कर रहे हैं, हंस हंस के शाम वाले बेदाद कर रहे हैं। प्यासे यतीम बच्चे फरियाद कर रहे हैं, किसको बुलाए ज़ैनब, बेटे रहे न भाई। अब्बास की बहन पे कैसी घड़ी ये आई, बालों में खाक डाले, रोती है बेरिदाई। घबरा रही है ज़ैनब, मज़लूम दिल को थामे, किस किस को दे तसल्ली, किस किस को दे दिलासे। सैदानियाँ तड़प कर करती है आहो नाले, हालत पे बीबियों की रोती है कुल खुदाई। अब्बास की बहन पे ख़ैमे भी जल गए हैं, बिस्तर भी जल गया है, जो शाम तक थी सर पर नेज़े पे वो रिदा है। बैठी हुई ज़मीं पे औलाद मुस्तफ़ा है, करबो बला के बन में सब लुट गई कमाई। अब्बास की बहन पे कैसी घड़ी ये आई, बालों में खाक डाले, रोती है बेरिदाई। Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah, Brother Hadi and Brother Asif. Inshallah, we'll then continue with our program with a speech by Shaykh Muhammad Pour.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه المنتجبين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين عليهم السلام. السلام عليك يا أبا صالح المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. My dearest brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you on this eve of the day of Arbaeen, where we gather to commemorate the 40th day anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, and for us to recommit ourselves to the values that the Imam stood for, the holy Imam of our time stands for, and for us to readjust and reprioritize those things in our lives that we know will help further the cause of the Imam and will cause us to respond positively to the calls of the Imam, not only the calls of the Ahlul Bayt following in these 40 days, but also the call that the holy Imam of our time is making right now. I wanted to, in these 3 nights, reflect on a topic that I've been thinking about this Muharram, and I've spoken on it from the first Ashra until today. And I think it's really important for us to, especially at this junction, at this Arbaeen, which has been 40 days or 50 days now really, that we have been in the presence of the Imam, the presence of the Ahlul Bayt, that we have attended Majlis, and that we have again immersed ourselves with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and the principles of the Ahlul Bayt, that we reflect on what it is that the Imams have accomplished and what it is that we have done in these 40 or 50 days. And that topic or that question is this, is why the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam perseveres. And in asking that question and in contemplating on that question, what I'd like us to do is not just to list those things that make the movement of Imam al-Hussein special, that has its own place, but really it provides us an opportunity to think about what it takes for us to continue to contribute and participate in this continuing and everlasting revolution and reform and fight for justice. So in the movement of Imam Hussein, I will outline over these 3 nights 7 different keys or principles that I think are important and fundamental to the perseverance of this fight. So this doesn't mean that they are restricted to these 7. Of course, these will have many sub-branches, but I think these are great points to reflect on. I will share hopefully 3 of them tonight, and I will share a couple in tomorrow, and inshallah on the 3rd night we will on Friday conclude this discussion. So I'm asking you to engage in it, and of course I will try to strike a balance between intellectual engagement and also reflection, personal, behavioral, and emotional reflection. So as an introduction, as a preface, I think it's really important to remember that what the movement of Imam al-Hussein represents is one that works to enliven or revive that God-given spirit and that nature, primordial nature that all human beings have. We call that in the Islamic and the Quranic language the fitra. Once that is enlivened, once that is reactivated, then an individual can really draw on society at large to do the right thing and to apply themselves in the fight for justice. Why we experience or we observe sometimes responses that are not appropriate to this fitra is because this fitra has become a little inactive. We know that this fitra can never be removed per the Quranic explanation. فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَتَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. There will be no change in the creation of God. So having this primordial nature, one of the reasons why ourselves personally or society at large finds itself challenged is that this has become inactive. And there's a quote from the great Shaheed Malcolm X, Shaheed Malik al-Shabbaz, which he states, if you want to get this movement, this revolution going, there's a right and a wrong approach. He states, and I quote, the greatest mistake of the movement, speaking in his context, but I think in the larger movement for the fight for justice, the greatest mistake of the movement has been trying to organize a sleeping people around specific goals. In this case, the fight for justice. He says you have to wake the people up first, and then you'll get action. And I think the actions of Imam Hussein really was the epitome of trying to wake up a sleeping people, to wake up a sleeping community. And this 40 days really is an attempt to awaken our own souls, our own hearts, but also to use that as an opportunity to engage others in awakening their God-given potential and that primordial nature in the fight for justice. So in reviewing these elements, I use this introduction to remind us that it's important to remember that any successful revolutionary or reformist movement, any fight for justice, they must include or incorporate these elements that we're mentioning. And to go one step further, any other cause or effort that may be fighting for justice, any movement, any association, any initiative that we may be allying with, those will have its limits, and they will eventually be subsumed under a larger or universal movement and fight for justice, which we understand to be the Messianic, the Mahdavi movement. So we understand this continuum to be there, that the Husseini movement is the Mahdawi movement. And if we observe smaller movements in society that are fighting for justice, even if they are restricted to certain rights, to certain groups, to certain causes, that's okay. We analyze how we can lend support, but we remember that we don't get boxed in by those, that we are ultimately fighting for that most universal struggle for justice, and our conception of justice is one that is of course defined by the Holy Quran, the teachings and the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and it is informed by the practice of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, especially Imam al-Hussein. So, moving on to the actual content, the first key principle to remember, and especially I think in times where we feel a little overwhelmed, we feel a little deflated, we don't feel as much good happening in the world, is to remember that the will of Allah, the will of God, is for this movement to be successful, and that this movement is successful. This is the will of God. And once God wills something to happen, we know that that thing is happening and will happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Qasas states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَرَبُّكَ يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَخْتَارُ, that your Lord creates whatever He wishes and He chooses. مَا كَانَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَارَةِ, they have no choice. Subhanallah wa ta'ala amma yushrikun. Immaculate is Allah and exalted above having any partners. So it is Allah that chooses and ultimately has that power to make what He wants to happen. وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا, and do not say about anything, I will indeed do it tomorrow. إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, except that that statement is followed by adding, if God wills, God willing. وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ, and remember your Lord when you are forgetful. I think in this case of fighting for justice, we need to remember that the ultimate source of power and the ultimate source of victory is God, is the will of Allah. Because Allah has willed for this to happen, this will happen, and this is happening. When we forget to this point and we feel like the forces of evil, the forces of destruction, the forces of oppression and tyranny are winning and are victorious, we must be reminded of this fact. That we must remind ourselves, and we must remind the next generation who will continue the fight for justice, that they are victorious. Even if they don't feel and see the signs of victory right now, that victory is with them. And that victory will manifest itself much sooner than they anticipate. So, one of the ways that we are reminded of this victory is to remember the Quranic stories and narratives that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demonstrates that change and that reform within society. And one of the most impactful stories and narratives is the narrative of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. We know this, and the reason why we can draw this parallel is because the example of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam has been compared to that of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam by the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Allow me to first give this introduction of some of the things the Quran says about Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. In Surah An-Nahl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifa. Indeed, Ibrahim was a nation all by himself. He was obedient to Allah. He was a Hanif. وَلَمْ يَكُوا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He was not amongst the polytheists. So Ibrahim as an individual represented a nation. He represented a force for change and reform in society. There are a number of du'as that Ibrahim ﷺ makes throughout the Quran. If I'm not mistaken, Ibrahim is the prophet that the Quran captures the most number of requests and du'as that he makes. From amongst these du'as that he makes in Surah Ash-Shu'ara, the Quran states, Rabbi habli hukman wa alhiqni bis-salihin. O Allah, grant me unerring judgment and unite me with the righteous. وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. And in addition to that, confer upon me a worthy repute amongst the posterity. There's two ways of reading this second verse. وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. One way to read this is to say, allow those who speak of me in coming generations, for them to speak of me with good repute. That they think of me highly, they remember me well, they have good things to say about me. That I was a force for positive change in the world. My legacy, my memory to be positive, good. Another, maybe not even another way of reading it, but a reading that is very close to this and perhaps expands on another dimension of this, says that allow those who remember me in future generations for them to be truthful, or in another way, accurate in the remembrance of what my legacy was. So allow them not to misunderstand, distort the meaning of my life. What was the meaning of the life of Ibrahim ﷺ? One of those pivotal moments of a very large, long, profound life was the episode of reviving the Holy Lands, Mecca. And there, when he's building or rebuilding the Kaaba, as the Quran tells us, he's building it with his son, he makes a certain number of du'as afterwards. He states in Surah Ibrahim, verse 37, رَبَّنَا إِنِّي أَسْكَنْتُ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي بِوَادٍ غَيْرِ ذِي زَرْعٍ عِنْدَ بَيْتِكَ الْمُحَرَّمِ. O Allah, I have settled a part of my descendants, of my family, in a barren land by your sacred house that has been established. Our Lord, Rabbana liyuqimu salah, for the establishment of prayer. So, not this sacrifice, but this action has been undertaken here in these circumstances for the purposes of the establishment of your worship and of your prayer. That's the reason why we're here. And because of that, this is the request that I'm making. فَاجْعَلْ أَفْئِدَةً مِنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ. So I request, make the hearts of at least a part of the people fond of these descendants. Allow the people not just to like them for the sake of liking, not to like them because they're descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam, they're the children of Ibrahim, that may be a part of it, but the very fact that they have come and they have applied themselves to the establishment of this sacred house and to the establishment of this prayer, Allah make the hearts of the people fond of them for that reason. Allow them to acknowledge their fight for justice, their fight for that which is pleasing to you, and allow them to create some sort of affinity and connection because of that. وَارْزُقْهُمْ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ. and provide for them of your sustenance and your fruits so they can survive. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَشْكُرُونَ, so that they may give thanks and be thankful to you. So, this is the foundation that was laid by Ibrahim ﷺ, and his legacy, his action, is the reason why the Quran speaks of him as a nation in and of himself. Imam al-Hussein in many ways is the same. Here is an individual that is coming from a direct descendant of the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And his coming to Karbala, even though in whatever way we want to read it, may not have been an original intention, the intention certainly in not just leaving Medina, but throughout his life, was to serve the cause of Allah, was to preserve the prophetic practice and the prophetic teaching, and was to revise, reignite, and re-enliven, restore the correct prophetic practice in a society that he saw was veering off the path. So he comes to this area now that, much like Mecca in that time, is a barren land, now in Karbala. And there he is also setting up roots. In this monumental task, just as Ibrahim alayhi salam and his family, his son, establish the sacred house in the Kaaba, Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is establishing here a monument of the sanctity of God. And those same kind of requests are being made. That it is narrated that when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam was born and brought to the presence of the Holy Prophet, that he recites the verse similar, that means the portion similar to that Ibrahim makes of his descendants. O Allah, so make the hearts of a group of people fond of them. And we know, of course, how that response was to the descendants of the Holy Prophet. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this great blessing that, of course, is for all Muslims, but the love of the Ahlul Bayt and the love of Imam al-Hussein that is put in our hearts, inshallah. That is by the prophetic dua. And may we be those who acknowledge, appreciate, and cherish this. And that we work to please the Holy Prophet in the dua that he made, inshallah. So, this is the first point. That this is the will of Allah. That the action of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam be successful. And it was. Because we know for sure the establishment of that sacred ground, of those sacred actions, the establishment of the institution of the Hajj, and so much more that we remember Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. That he is the common ground between the revealed and the divine religions, what we call them the Abrahamic faiths. His name and legacy remains alive. And they remain so powerful, perhaps as powerful as they were during his time. This is the nation of Ibrahim. And we are instructed to be amongst the nation of Ibrahim. Because this is the lasting legacy. So too Imam al-Hussein. The will of Allah is not only for Imam al-Hussein to have been victorious, he was, but for that victory to be extended and to continue. Just as the Abrahamic victory, the Abrahamic legacy, the Abrahamic culture continues until today, so too does the Husseini. So we engage with that. We embrace that. And we perpetuate that. And we are reminded that this is the will of God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never allow the Abrahamic legacy to be destroyed, to be forgotten. We may become forgetful ourselves and think that all is lost. No. The establishment of Tawheed is there at that center through the Abrahamic symbol and the Abrahamic legacy. And so too is the fight not only for the preservation and the purity of Islam in the actions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his companions, but also in the fight for justice, the larger fight for justice in humanity, that is the legacy of Imam al-Hussein. And that is the legacy that the Imam of our time, may Allah hasten his reappearance, will continue to fight for, and he will epitomize. So we remember that the reason why this movement is successful, this resistance, this revolution, this reform, is because Allah has willed that. When Lady Zainab Salamullah alayha has this interaction in Damascus in the courtyard with Yazid, she mentions this point. There's nothing that you can do that can change the will of God. And the will of God is that Allah has honored us with revelation. He has honored us with the book. He has honored us with prophethood. She says, you cannot achieve our status, nor can you reach our position, nor can you remove our remembrance, nor can you remove yourself from the shame and dishonor that is now your lot because of the excesses that you perpetrated and because of the oppression that you've done. That is what God has willed. The same will that Allah has deemed for His friends to have a good end and for them to be successful in their aims. So this is it's not just a belief that we verbalize, it's a conviction that we have in our hearts. That we, insofar as we align ourselves with this Husseini movement, that we are victorious and that God is on our side. As cliche as it sounds, this is because we are told this and we are taught this. And we align ourselves with anyone else that is also fighting for this divine justice on earth. This is the izzah, the might that is given. And this is what the Quran speaks about, of the conferring of the might, the izzah, to the believing people. قُلِ اللَّهُمَّ مَالِكِ الْمُلْكِ تُؤْتِ الْمُلْكَ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتَنْزِعُ الْمُلْكَ مِمَّنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُعِزُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ وَتُذِلُّ مَنْ تَشَاءُ بِيَدِكَ الْخَيْرُ. O Allah, Master of all sovereignty, you give sovereignty to whomever you please, and you strip sovereignty from whoever you wish. And you make mighty and give izzah to whomever you wish, and you degrade whomever you wish. All choice is in your hands. إِنَّكَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٍ. Indeed, you have power over all things. So that might that is given to us is one that ensures, because izzah means something that's firm, something that is mighty. It's a condition that restricts anyone or anything else from being able to overpower an individual. That izzah is given because an individual or a group or a society is fighting for that divine notion of justice. So I just wanted tonight's first point, the key to the perseverance of this Husseini movement is because of this conviction of the will of God being success of those who fight for justice. And for us not to feel intimidated or to feel hopeless or to feel defeated because we see in the world around us the forces of evil, the forces of oppression, and we can see it on a national and a global level. That should not break our will. If anything, that should give us a newfound hope and a newfound determination to continue fighting in this path. These are the moments really where that character not only is built, but that commitment is shown. This is not the time to retreat. This is not the time to feel down. This is the time to stand up. This is the time to put the heads up high. And especially after these 40 days of the narratives that we've heard, the stories that we've heard, and the remembrance of Ahlul Bayt, their story is a story of perseverance. Their story is a story of courage. Their story is a story of strength. And their story is a story of the love for justice by any means necessary. That's the story that we've been learning and relearning. That is the narrative that we've been telling ourselves and training ourselves. That tells us, even in the worst of circumstances, that we are committed to this fight because we know victory is ours, and in reality victory belongs to Allah. The izzah belongs to Allah. وَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That the izzah, the might, belongs to Allah, it is extended to the Prophet, and that is extended to the believing community. We, in these small groups that we're gathering, compared to the larger global population, we play an important role in reminding ourselves and reminding others that victory comes to those who are fighting for that which is right in life. And that those who are oppressed today, they will also be relieved of that oppression through the response of others, especially through groups like us. Not tomorrow, but today. And I think this is what we take away in terms of our own reflection and in terms of our own actions. So I wanted to get through a little bit more of these keys, these principles. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow on the day of Arbaeen. I think there are some very important points that will be made tomorrow that hopefully will call for more reflection, but it will also ask us to reflect on some examples that will be brought that help us make those connections and see ourselves in those accounts, inshallah. With your permission, we'll recite a few minutes of Musibah as we prepare ourselves for the Arbaeen of Imam al-Hussein. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. سلام العارف بحرمتك المخلص في ولايتك المتقرب إلى الله بمحبتك البريء من أعدائك. سلام من قلبه بمصابك مقروح ودمعه عند ذكرك مسفوح. سلام المفجوع الحزين الواله المستكين. Salutations from us, O Aba Abdullah, upon you and upon your faithful companions and your family. A salam from one who recognizes your sanctity, who is a sincere believer in your guardianship, who seeks nearness to Allah through your love, and who is aloof from your enemies. Salutation from us whose hearts are wounded due to the tribulations that you have suffered, and whose tears flow in your remembrance. Salutations from the one who is distressed, grief-stricken, distracted, and yielding. Ya Aba Abdullah, how great was the pain and the loss of your martyrdom. How difficult were the scenes on the Ahlul Bayt to be there to witness what happened to you and your soldiers on the day of Ashura. Oh, my master, you know that the sorrow and the grief and the pain did not end there for your family who were taken captives. Their journey continued with your radiant head and the head of the Shuhada As they were paraded from city to city, the people gathered to watch these captives come. They celebrated their grief, their pain. When they asked the Ahlul Bayt, Zainul Abidin, what was the most difficult of these episodes? What was the most difficult experience you had? The Imam responds 3 times, Asham, Asham, Asham. What happened in Damascus, O my master, that calls you to remember the pain and grief in Asham, Asham, Asham? As the Ahlul Bayt prepare to depart Damascus on their way back to Medina, all they can remember all the events that unfolded on these few days that they were taken captive in Damascus. It is narrated that our master Zainul Abidin recited these lines of poetry of his experience in the days and nights in Damascus. أقعد ذليلا في دمشق كأنني من الزنج عبد غاب عنه نصير. We were being circulated in Damascus in a state of degradation, as though we were strangers and slaves without any helpers or support. وجدي رسول الله في كل مشهد وشيخي أمير المؤمنين وزير. While everyone knows that my grandfather is the messenger of Allah, and that our Shaykh and elder is the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib. فيا ليت أمي لم تلدني ولم أكن يزيد يراني في البلاد أسير. The pain was so great and the degradation so much that I wish I had not been born, so that Yazid would not see me as a captive in these cities. In another one of these episodes, Zainul Abidin is speaking to Minhal ibn Umru in the bazaar of Damascus. Minhal comes to Zainul Abidin and asks him, O son of the Holy Prophet, how did you pass the night? These were the nights of Ahlul Bayt in Damascus. Zainul Abidin responds, in this nation we are like the prisoners of the Fir'aun, as the Banu Israel. They killed our men and made our women widows. O Minhal, the Arabs boast to others that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi is from them, and the clan of Quraysh takes pride over the fact that the Prophet is from their clan. He's a Qurayshite. But here we are, Minhal, his children, whose rights have been usurped. Our blood has been spilled innocently. We have been exiled from our homes. We recite the verse of the Holy Quran, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. As we recited in Nahiya Muqaddasa, this is because of the great pains of what happened after. وَصُبْيَا أَهْلُكَ كَالْعَبِيدِ. Your family, Hussein, were captured like slaves. وَصُفِّدُوا فِي الْحَدِيدِ فَوْقَ أَقْطَابِ الْمَطِيَّاتِ. They were bound with iron chains atop the camels. تَلْفَحُ وُجُوهَهُمْ حَرُّ الْهَاجِرَاتِ. The midday heat scorching their faces to the extent that in one narration from the daughter of Abu Abdullah Fatima, Harith ibn Ka'b narrates, Yazid puts us in a house where we exposed to the sunshine directly, to the extent that our skins were burnt and cast away. يساقون في البراري والفلوات. We were driven across the deserts and wastelands. أيديهم مغلولة إلى الأعناق. Their hands chained to their necks. يطاف بهم في الأسواق. They were paraded around the markets. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم حسين.
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद व अज्जल फरजहुम। मोमिनीन, और अब इसी के साथ ही मैं ऑनलाइन गुजारिश करूँगा कराची से, पाकिस्तान से, अंजुमन शबाबुल मोमिनीन से कि वह आके मौला की बारगाह में नोआ ख़ानी वसीना ज़नी पेश करें। और मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद सलावत।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। यानी मदद रजब अली ख़ान अपने साथियों के साथ अरबाइन के हवाले से हमारा सिटी ऑफ नॉलेज अमेरिका से हम आपके सामने लाइव हैं, और मैं शुक्रिया अदा करूँगा सिटी ऑफ नॉलेज का कि उन्होंने हमें मौका दिया इस सवाब में शामिल सवाब होने का। और साथ ही मैं अपने भाई दोस्त हमारे बड़े अच्छे मनगमत ख़ान, नौ ख़ान, आसिफ, उनके लिए भी बहुत हमारी दुआएं हैं। मौला उनको सलामत रखे, और उन्होंने सारा ये अरेंज किया और हमें भी कहा कि हम लोग इस ड्यूटी में शामिल हों। तो दुरूद पड़ेगा मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। वीर ना मैनू ख्वाब डराउंदे ने, भैण दे दर्द मुका जा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। ऐ हो रस्ते, ऐ हो बूहे, ऐ हो मिट्टियां अकबर। ऐ हो ताना, ऐ हो आसा, ऐ हो चिट्टियां अकबर। वेख ले सी बैन बिरा सारे, साडा दर्द विसाजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर आजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर आजा। कोई होंदा मेरा अपना, मेरे अथरू वंडदा। आके सिर ते मेरे कोई हदिसाया करदा। हाथ तो मैनू माण उठादा ते, कहदा तख्त ते आजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। अकबर में मर जावांगी, वतना ते वीर राजा। ऐ हो रस्ते, ऐ हो बूहे, ऐ हो मिट्टियां अकबर। ऐ हो तागा, ऐ हो आसा, ऐ हो चिट्टियां अकबर। वेख ले नब के दर है मेरा है करें ताजे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई उठ के मेवर को उठ के मेवर को हो जाऊंगा इशारे देंदा जे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई है कौन ऐसा ना क्या है ऐसा वाल यजीद करेगा जे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई उठ के मेवर को उठ के मेवर को हो जाऊंगा इशारे देता जे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई है कौन ऐसा ना क्या है ऐसा वाल यजीद करेगा जे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई ऐसा ही नहीं तेरे बाबे थी उड़ के तड़पड़ के आई है ऐसा ही नहीं तेरे बाबे थी उड़ के तड़पड़ के आई है कितने वीर अब्बास हमीद कितने वीर अब्बास हमीद की अजले गैरत झिड़के दाजे बीबी ज़ैनब रोंदी रह गई परदेसी हाँ लड़ासी हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ परदेसी हाँ लड़ासी हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ मेरी माँ ज़हरा दी पाकिदा मेरी माँ ज़हरा दी पाकिदा कोई लुट को बचाओ हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ परदेसी हाँ लड़ासी हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ रत मूते मल के असगर दी शबीर है रो के आके रत मूते मल के असगर दी शबीर है रो के आके जेड़ा मावी कह नहीं सकदा है जेड़ा मावी कह नहीं सकदा है ओदा जुर्म दसावो हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ परदेसी हाँ लड़ासी हाँ कोई मदद कुआ हो हाँ अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलिहि व
السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء يا سيدة النساء العالمين السلام عليك يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين السلام عليك يا قمر بني هاشم يا أبو الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا أم المصائب، يا زينب بنت أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم يا شهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، يا علي بن موسى رضا راضي بالقدر والقضاء، السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان، يا سيدي أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.